I'm very happy to be here today to tell you about a lady by the name of Catherine or Kitty Dukakis. So let's get right into it here. Of course, as many people know, she was a potential First Lady of the United States. She is the wife, continues to be the wife, of one Michael Dukakis, who was the Democratic nominee for president in 1988. So Kitty has quite an interesting story here. Beginning at a fairly early age, she started abusing some diet pills that were known as, I think you call it Dexedrine or possibly Dexedrine. In any case, it's a fairly strong medication, is what they used to call it back in the day, and she was using that every day starting at the age of 19, and she did that for 26 years. And this was kind of a secret thing that she had going on, kind of like Betty Ford, I guess, in a way, right? So initially, Kitty Dukakis was not a Dukakis, but she initially married a different guy whose name was John Chaffetz. And John Chaffetz was a California guy, and he is actually he went on to be with another lady, the father of a guy named Jason Chaffetz, which you might have heard of him. He is formerly a big wig in Washington and so forth. In any case, she divorces this guy, moves on, and finds old Michael Dukakis, or young Michael Dukakis, and they hitch up, and it's quite a ride from there. So Michael Dukakis was a longtime governor of Massachusetts, and kind of in an unlikely way became the Democratic nominee in 1988 after a couple other stronger or more well-known candidates, you might say, had some unfortunate ends to their campaign. And Kitty Dukakis started to develop quite the problem with alcohol, especially during the time of the 1988 presidential campaign. And according to her autobiography, she was drinking maybe one shot of vodka a day, and she admits that she did go on some benders even during the time of the presidential campaign. But it wasn't really until after her husband lost that race to George Herbert Walker Bush, so the first George Bush, it wasn't really after that loss that she really descended into extreme alcoholism. So I've got a list here of things that after that campaign she really fell into a depression, and she would basically stay home all day. As soon as the rest of the family left in the morning, she would basically start drinking and just keep going until she passed out. The family, tells stories of coming home to find mom basically passed out in her own vomit. Is how those stories typically go. So during that period of time, after this loss, and she took that very, very hard, she was drinking, according to her, rubbing alcohol, vanilla extract. We also have nail polish, hairspray, and aftershave. So I guess she was getting into Michael's aftershave sometimes when maybe she was running out of alcohol or something like that. So as you could see, this was devolving into a pretty serious situation, and it's sometimes asked of her and wondered, well, what would have happened if her husband had won the election and she would have been First Lady? How would that have gone, right? Given the way things went, the way they really went. So she is quoted as saying about that question, she says, "I'm sure the first crisis would have sent me out of control. I'm equally certain, thrust into the smothering protective confines of the White House, I would not have been able to seek proper help." So that is that's the second half of this story, is that while Kitty Dukakis is known oftentimes as this person who was addicted to these diet pills, or this alcoholic who was really just absolutely hitting rock bottom, the second half of her life has been much more inspirational, you might say, much more positive, although still has had a lot of ups and downs, you might say, and we'll talk about that right now. So Kitty has admitted for some time that she's been basically depressed her whole life. She's suffered from just absolutely extreme, crippling depression for many different periods in her life, and she actually began taking what many people think doesn't even exist anymore, which is oftentimes known as electroshock therapy. And so she has become really one of the big advocates of the potential use of electroshock therapy for people who really do suffer from depression that just does not respond to things like counseling or the modern medications and so forth. And she's kind of gotten her husband on board with this as well, because Michael has seen how effective this kind of therapy has been with his wife. So as a result of this therapy that she's been taking, she has come off all of her medications. She has become an ex-smoker, so she used to be kind of like Patricia Nixon or Pat Nixon, where she just smoked like crazy, and she's become an ex-smoker. And according to her, she's also working on her road rage, which she is, as she puts it, when they spend winter in California or in Los Angeles, she's still somewhat challenged by her tendencies toward road rage. But it's something that she's working on, and apparently this electroshock therapy might be helping with that a little bit too. So as you probably know, electroshock is it's kind of a traumatic thing, because what they're essentially doing is causing your brain, purposely causing seizures in your brain. And Kitty Dukakis admits that she does suffer from memory loss, which is a frequent complaint of people who undergo this kind of treatment, is that it just sort of like wipes out a lot of your memories and leaves her struggling in that department, admittedly. So one thing that this really says about Michael Dukakis is that he truly must really like this lady and be a really patient person, because his wife has been through a lot, and of course he's been through all of that kind of stuff with her, and having to deal with that. He's always stuck by Kitty. He's always supported her, as he does with this electroshock situation. But one question a lot of people ask is, how is it that he seems to be so out of the loop on all of this, or how didn't he know this stuff was going on for all this time? And some people say that maybe he did know, and that's where some of her coming out and admitting these things even back during the campaign days may have been a sort of like a tactic that lawyers use, right? Where if something bad's going on, it's better to just admit that on your side than have somebody else point it out. And so it's possible that some of her early admissions were a result of Michael or Michael's advisors saying, hey, Kitty, you got some serious stuff going on here, and you need to sort of let that out, but in a controlled way where you're controlling it, as opposed to your political opponents, such as, for example, Bush's campaign manager was quite the aggressive guy who liked to really go after those kind of human frailties or weaknesses. So some people think that that was a planned outing initially. We don't know. But she always claims that Michael never really knew about these things until she really started talking about them, because according to her, that was the person he always knew. So she was always that way. He never knew a Kitty before she started running into all these problems with substance abuse, depression, and so forth. So he just knew her as her, right? I find that a little bit hard to believe, but that is her explanation of it. So in the end, what we can say about Kitty Dukakis is a couple things, really. First of all, she was a very intense person. She really spoke her mind, and it would have been very interesting to see how she would have done as First Lady of the United States. It would have been an interesting ride, I'm sure. And she sort of views it as where she is today. She's sort of come full circle and talks about sort of being the person she started as before she went on this big ride with the presidential campaigns and all that kind of stuff. Except so now she's kind of gone back to where she started, feels much better, much healthier, and has really become, as I said, an advocate not only for shock therapy, but also really helping people with substance abuse problems as well. And she's become known, I think, aside from being known, of course, as this self-confessing could-have-been First Lady with various problems and frailties, she's really become known also nowadays as an author because, of course, she's had to write about this wild ride that she's had, not only with her husband's campaigning and so forth, but with her own personal problems and recovery from them. So that is the story of one Kitty Dukakis, and I'm glad to have told you that story today from a place called the International Peace Garden. And where we're at the moment, where I'm walking, there's not a whole lot of garden. This area here looks much more like what you would expect an International Peace Garden to look like. And it's kind of an interesting concept. So this garden sits directly on the border between the US and Canada. And if you really wanted to, you could put 1 foot in Canada and 1 foot in the US. It is a place where you don't have to go through any kind of border checkpoints in order to come to the garden. So the idea is that people from both countries could come here and kind of mingle and enjoy the gardens and be in both countries if they want to without having any kind of border control. However, I have to tell you, when you leave the Peace Garden, there is a border checkpoint that you go through. Whichever country you're actually entering into when you leave, you'll have to go through that, and you'll need at least a driver's license. What else? So this is kind of an interesting... Oh, I should tell you though, for Canadian visitors right now, you are subject to the quarantine rules and regulations of Canada. If you come to the garden and then you go back to Canada, you will have to do the 14-day quarantine and all the expenses, of course, that come along with that. It is actually by itself a pretty expensive place to visit. It costs $20 just to come in for the day and mingle around in the Peace Garden. So aside from that, it's also out in the middle of nowhere. This does happen to be kind of an unusual middle of nowhere because it's not really what you would think of when you think of North Dakota or Manitoba. I'm gonna go ahead and call it the Vermont of North Dakota, if people from Vermont will allow me that the ability to use that name. But it's in a place called the Turtle Mountains. Those aren't really mountains, they're more like hills, but still, hills are not common in North Dakota. It also has a lot of trees, and it's generally a very picturesque place and not what you would think of out here, where you'd expect it to be very flat and treeless and so forth.